Hey, what's happening, everybody? This is the Tuscan Gentleman, and I'm here for a non-Star Wars video, and a video that's very special to me, but pretty much an average video, just my honest thoughts about Pokemon X and Y, and the introduction of something new. Now, recent news about Pokemon X and Y is that there has been the confirmation of a new type being introduced to the game by Game Freak, and this is the Fairy type. Yes, the Fairy type has been confirmed by Game Freak just approximately 2 days ago. Now, to give you the facts, the last time a new type was introduced to the game was in Generation 2. And to exclude the terminology, Generation 2 is just gold, silver, and crystal, whereas Generation 1 was red, blue, and yellow. These two types that were introduced in Generation 2 were the Steel and Dark types, and they had good reason for being introduced to the game. Steel moves added a new dimension of weaknesses and strengths, while Dark moves were put out there to make Psychic less dominant. Now, during Generation 1, Psychic was only weak to Bug Pokemon, and most Bug Pokemon that had Bug moves were weak, like Beedrill, for instance, with Twin Needle. They were only used in the beginning of the game. So introducing a new type against Psychic would balance out that type. Now, returning to the Fairy type, what are my thoughts about it? Again, I am both surprised and taken aback. This is a dream come true to me. For me, this is a nice way to add new dimensions to the game, but there are a few things that I am still skeptical about, as any Pokemon fan would be. Now, these points may match up well with your points, but these are just my honest opinions, so listen carefully with an open mind and tell me what you think in the comments below if you care about it. Is it necessary to introduce a new type when there is already a balance? Now, according to Game Freak's information so far, the Fairy type is strong against the Dragon type. There's already two types that are strong against dragons right now, and that is Ice and Dragon. I don't see a reason to introduce a third type that is strong against dragons unless they feel that Dragon is still too strong, even after 6 generations. Put yourself in my shoes, or any Pokemon player's shoes. Ice types are found later in the game in pretty much every generation, as well as most ice moves for water types. And dragon types are found even much later, and even if they're found earlier, they're just plain hard to raise. I think because of this, introducing a third type that can easily be found early would give people the edge against the dragons. But that's just my opinion on it. And believe me about the difficulty of raising dragons. I once raised a team of 5 Dragonites and 1 Charizard. This was in my Pokemon Red version. Speaking of beating dragon types, I hope Fairy types aren't in the sole purpose of the game just for beating dragons. They should be able to weaken another type, like maybe Ghost types. To bring balance and equality to the game, they should also have weaknesses themselves. My top 2 candidates for Pokemon strong against Fairy should be Ghost and Dark types. It just seems to make obvious sense if you think about it. Or maybe Fairy types are weak against other Fairy types. Now, let's be honest, the introduction of a Fairy type is already shocking to begin with, and introducing another type that is weak to another type is going to be an all too familiar thing, such as dragons with dragons. Now, I have a point that is more of a request slash complaint about a certain Pokemon that deserves to be elevated to the Fairy Pokemon status. It's a Generation 1 Pokemon, it's a normal type, and if you have a good guess, then I want you to post it in the comments below, but I will be introducing it later in this video after I talk a little bit more about other aspects of the Fairy type. If you remember when the Steel type was introduced, Magnemite and Magneton were revamped into Steel types. Now that seemed like the right thing to do. But now I'm going to introduce the Pokemon that have been revamped for our very own Fairy type. Now, Game Freak so far has confirmed 3 Pokemon that have secondary Fairy types that were revamped from previous generations. These Pokemon are Jigglypuff, which is now a normal slash Fairy type, Meryl is a water slash Fairy type, and Gardevoir is a Psychic slash Fairy type. Now, this leads me to assume that a few other Pokemon will be Fairy types, but I'll talk about that after I talk about the 2 pure Fairy types. Yes, these two pure fairy types are being introduced in this particular generation. Let's talk about the original first. That's Flabebe. That's right, that's Flabebe with accents on the E. That's already a unique thing to begin with. Accents in a Pokemon's name. So far, Flabebe is a singular Pokemon introduced for the sake of establishing the fairy type for the media. Not much is really known about it or if it's actually part of any evolutionary line. Right now, the speculation on the name's origin for Flabebe is that due to the flower shape of the Pokemon and the accents in Bebe, this might be the combination of a flower and baby, because Bebe, with the accents on the E, is how you say baby in French. And coincidentally how you say baby in Spanish too. Now, this seems a little bit strange when you put it that way, right? But every Pokemon name has an origin. But this leads me to believe that Flabebe might either be A baby Pokemon, or B, the first in its evolutionary line. According to the numbers introduced by Game Freak for the Pokedex, Flabebe is tied with Joltik as the smallest Pokemon and is tied with Ghastly and Haunter as the lightest Pokemon. Its small stature and light weight makes it a pretty reasonable candidate to be a baby Pokemon. Without any other Pokemon introduced beside it, will it be the first baby Pokemon without an evolution? Who knows? Now, the second type that I want to introduce is not so original. This one is actually, well, I'll let you take a guess. The Pokemon is called Sylveon. It's a pure fairy type, and it matches up with a certain Pokemon that was introduced in Generation 1, that was introduced 2 more evolutions in Generation 2, and introduced 2 more evolutions in Generation 4. Oh, did I already give it away? Yep, that is correct, and this might either come off as good news or bad news for some of you people who wanted a Dragon Eevee, or if you wanted a Ghost Eevee, or maybe a Bug Eevee. But nope, we are getting a Fairy Eevee. If you notice the pattern that's going on over here, it's that in Generation 2 they introduced new evolutions, in Generation 4 they introduced 2 new evolutions, in Generation 6 they introduced 2 new evolutions. In Generation 8, they may introduce more evolutions. But Nintendo has been unpredictable recently, whereas we probably expected Pokemon Gray version, they gave us Black 2 and White 2. So you don't know what's gonna happen with Nintendo, it's unpredictable. My last point is more of a request / complaint depending on how things work out. Why isn't Clefairy a fairy type? Are they planning on introducing that later? Is it a mistake on their part, or was it just not meant to be? I really hope it is not meant to be. I can give you many good reasons why Clefairy should be a normal / fairy type along with Clefable, but I'll give you just 5. Reason 1. It's called Clefairy! It's called Clefairy! 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 Clefairy. No matter how you say it, it has fairy in its name. Reason number 2. Jigglypuff and Clefairy are pretty much counterparts and always have been. They're both pink, they're both round, they both have round evolutions, and they both evolve with the Moonstone. So why not make Jigglypuff a normal type and Clefairy a normal fairy type? Or if that's a dilemma, then make them both normal / fairy types along with their evolutions. Reason number 3 is because Jigglyfable and Clefpuff just don't sound good, let alone Jigglyfairy. And the reason I'm saying this is because you choose Jigglypuff to be a normal / fairy type, but you choose to neglect the Pokemon that already has fairy in its name and has had it for 6 generations. What happened to tracing back to your roots like Generation 5? Once again, Jigglyfairy and Clefpuff. Think about it. Reason number 4. Clefairy can be the ultimate mascot for fairy types due to its long years in the game. Just imagine, whereas Pikachu is the mascot of electric Pokemon and the Pokemon game, Charizard may be the mascot of fire types, and maybe Blastoise might be the mascot of water types, you'll have Clefairy being the mascot of the fairy types, the pioneer. it's already been around for so long, people are already familiar with it, and it's gonna make it that much easier to transition into a new type, similar to how Onyx was, or Magneton was already in Generation 1 and was kind of the bridge between the previous generation and a new generation, introducing a new type. Reason number 5, it's called Clefairy. Even though it's called Pippi, and that's what I mean, Pippi in Japanese, which has nothing to do with fairies, this little detail in typing can actually create a huge rift between English and Japanese fans, because whereas in Japan it's called Pippi, which has nothing to do with fairies, and in Generation 1 in English it's called Clefairy, the introduction of the actual fairy type makes it difficult for fans to grasp what is actually going on. Should we trust the Japanese or the English dub? This kind of thing only affects you if you're my kind of fan, and believe me, I'm my kind of fan. But anyways, that's all I have to talk about in this video. I think I am going to make another video or several more videos talking about Pokemon X and Y leading up to the release. If you enjoyed this little fireside chat, then please leave a like, a comment, or a share, and any of that stuff would really help me a lot, because I'm trying to get big out there just like any other YouTuber, but I'm also trying to have a little fun doing it, and I want you guys to have a little fun doing it. So if you enjoyed this video, then again, please leave a like, comment, or share. Any constructive criticism, or just any thank you for making this video, or anything like that. And now I'm just babbling on. I will see you guys next time.